From Moment to Movement with Tamara Banks has been made possible through the generous support of the Anchor Point Foundation, helping nonprofit organizations and leaders creatively solve problems in their communities around the world.
Racism is steeped into the very core of this country. And now, in 2020, Black voices are tired of being ignored, muffled, and killed. Millions of Americans are demonstrating, protesting to make their voices heard, especially Black Americans. A movement has to arise from the ashes of the moment. From Moment to Movement is a series of one-on-one truth-telling conversations with the Black community, aimed at working towards addressing police brutality and changing systemic racism. Hi, I'm Tamara Banks, your host for From Moment to Movement, a platform for Black voices to be heard, unfiltered and uncensored. Now, it's tough to have conversations about police brutality and systemic racism. But in the past several months, hundreds of thousands of people have taken to the streets. From Moment to Movement provides a platform for Black voices to be heard. And while it's not the Black community's responsibility to educate white people, From Moment to Movement will provide information about resources for white community members who want to learn how to engage in thoughtful, respectful conversations with African Americans and get to understand and learn what Jim Crow is all about. We'll talk about white fragility and racial battle fatigue. Our first guest is Mickaela Sherman, a recent college graduate and up-and-coming journalist. Mickaela, thanks so much for joining us. I appreciate your time. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Tamara, for having me today.
Of course. Now, like I said, you live in Atlanta, and it's been very interesting the past several weeks, really across the country. But what we know specifically about Atlanta is we've had demonstrations and protests and some violence, as I mentioned earlier. And we are all doing this in the middle of a pandemic. Tell me about how you're feeling at this moment in time, because I think it's important to note a lot of younger people, millennials, this is sort of their first big national event. You weren't either here or aware of what was going on during 9/11, which is probably the last major national and international event. How are you doing? How are you feeling about things?
At this current moment, I would say that I've been feeling a little overwhelmed with everything that's been going on. I say that because as a young person, I am just trying to figure out where I fit into this narrative. Um, I think we as young people have thought that we have gotten past all of these social or racial injustices, and that, not saying that police brutality is not prevalent, but to see these killings like Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, and to see it on a national level has really been an eye opener for me as a young person, that, you know, we need to make a change on the levels that we're in. So it's really been a lot for me to take it all in, but I'm really trying to figure out what actionable steps that I can take to really make a change in my community.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that I wonder if you felt like the civil rights movement that you study, you know, Dr. King, Rosa Parks, went through what they went through in order to move the civil rights movement into the Civil Rights Act. And for Dr. King, of course, gave his life. And here we are in 2020 experiencing very similar things. So that's kind of maybe I don't know, I don't want to put words in your mouth, sort of a disconnect.
Right. And I think that's kind of why I've been in shock for the most part, is that you kind of think that you've moved past it. I feel like or America has kind of given us that fake reality that we are all free and we are all equal and we all have the same opportunities. But time after time, as we see again and again, that we really do not. So as a young person, it's really trying to figure out how we can dismantle the system, how we can come together and make these social reforms, the reforms in the police system. And we have to understand that, you know, our ancestors did put in the work, but that work doesn't stop, and that we have to continue to come together. And I feel as though we are doing a great job right now. We are slowly seeing changes, and I believe that we have to continue to keep that up so that our children's children will be able to reap the fruits that we are planting right now.
What are the conversations your scope of friends and colleagues are having right now?
I would say the conversation is really just trying to figure out where that balance is, um, between showing that we are not going to take anything anymore, giving that force. I think that's the balance between showing that force, but also really being strategic about everything. And I think our generation right now, we're kind of at the point where we're like, okay, enough is enough. The the protests that we're doing, we're actually getting noticed by political figures. So maybe we need to continue to do these things. Maybe we need to continue to post these type of things on social media to get these individuals attention. So right now, I really believe that the conversation between us is really just trying to figure out where we can make the biggest change. And I feel as though the biggest change that we believe that we can make is going out in these streets protesting, and letting them know that we really want to make a change.
And have you been able to go out and protest? Do you feel, for lack of a better term, safe, or maybe a different way of protesting?
I actually have not been out to protest. I actually been donating my money to different causes. I really don't feel comfortable going out and protesting, and that's not my way that I feel that I can show my support in the best way. I am more of a strategic person. I like to sit down and see where my voice can be heard the most, not saying that those that are out there protesting are not helping to the cause, but I feel I best serve really sitting down, trying to figure out where I can make the most change and donating my money to organizations that are already really coming together and making those changes in our community.
Mm-hmm. Are you feeling optimistic, or are you feeling sort of like, oh, wow, here we go again. My parents and grandparents fought for this, and it doesn't seem like the needle is moving, and maybe feeling more frustrated than optimistic?
At the beginning, I was a little frustrated. I can't lie. I was really frustrated because it's just disheartening to see that this is a repetitive thing that continues to happen for so many years. But I am beginning to feel a lot optimistic about what's going on. That if we continue to fight, if we continue to demand that we want these changes, then we will eventually get there. I think we should not get discouraged by what we're seeing right now, because it's a part of the growing pains of making a change. So I believe if we continue to stick together, we continue to protest, we continue to sit down and try and make strategic plans to further ourselves, we would definitely get to where we want to be in the future.
As an up-and-coming journalist, how do you feel about the way the news has been covered across the spectrum and the various channels, be it locally, nationally, internationally, left, right, main, down the middle of the road? Because I know you're a news watcher. That's what you do. That's what you study. What are your thoughts?
Right. I would say CNN, I've been watching them a lot, has been doing a really good job with letting the viewers know when the looting and the protests was happening, that is just not African Americans that are out there that are doing that. And it was so interesting to watch that majority of the videos that I was seeing on social media, on national television, were Caucasians that were taking part in the looting, and a majority part of that. But with other news outlets, I didn't necessarily see them trying to inform viewers that it wasn't just one particular group of people. So as a journalist coming into the industry, I really want to make sure that I do a good job with those storytellings, and I do a good job with actually depicting what's going on, because the media is so powerful and is so influential, and what you show can change the narrative of how people view a certain type of person. So I really feel as though as journalists and people that work in the news industry, we really do have to do a better job with telling people's authentic stories. Because me watching from Atlanta and something going on in California, if the news is telling me one thing and I am only left up to believe what the news is saying unless I do that extra research. And a lot of people aren't doing that. So I really think it's kind of been half and half, but I've been seeing still a lot of people leaning towards that. It's a lot of African Americans that are out here looting and being destructive when that's really not the case. It's a lot of other groups that are really trying to come in and band together with us to make a change. And I love seeing that.
So this show is about giving Black voices a platform to be heard. Folks that don't always get called by CNN or Fox or MSNBC to be on the air to get their thoughts and be heard. What is something that you'd like to say or that you think is relevant and important for the white mainstream community in this country to know or to be aware of or to try to understand from a Black woman's perspective?
I would say that our traumas are real. I think a lot of white people don't understand that we deal with trauma each and every day. For me personally, I have a Black brother, of course, but he just to think that at any moment him going out could be the last moment. I think that's one of the things that scares me the most, because my brother, he likes to walk a lot. So we saw with the Ahmaud Arbery situation, he was on a jog and he was killed while he was jogging. So I would want to tell those white individuals that, we are dealing with a lot of trauma. And sometimes the trauma, that how we deal with that trauma is not presented in the best way or in the best light. But we are really trying to move forward, and we are really trying to come to a common ground. We really want to see change. We really want to see our people on the same level as everyone else. We want those same opportunities. And we are just at the point where we are going to continue to demand those things. So I would just say, just give us some time and we will eventually get to where we want to be.
Great. Mickaela Sherman, up and coming journalist in Atlanta. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you being here and sharing your thoughts and insights with us. You be safe and healthy out there, my friend.
Thank you for having me.
You're right, Mickaela. It's shocking that we're having this conversation about systemic racism in the 21st century. Staying with young people, our next guest is a brother, an artist in Brunswick, Georgia, where Ahmaud Arbery was gunned down. Roderrick, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. Hey, listen, as I mentioned, you are from Brunswick, Georgia, where Ahmaud Arbery lived. And I first want to talk to you about what you were doing when you first heard the news about Ahmaud being chased down in the neighborhood there by two off-duty white officers.
Well, originally when the story was first reported, it wasn't reported in the way that it should have been reported. So at first when the story was reported, it was looked over. But then a couple of weeks later, I was just laying in bed, and I had got tagged in a Facebook post by a friend of mine, and basically it was an editorial, and he was requesting that they like re-report the story, because he pointed out a lot of things that wasn't reported properly. And honestly, when I like found out about it, like my heart sunk, because I was like it was kind of in like disbelief, like, nah, this can't be real. You know what I'm saying? So it took some time to let it sink in, but ultimately my reaction was the same basically a couple of months later when the video actually came out and we was actually able to see what had happened. Honestly, when I first saw that video, you know, I was in tears, because I immediately, like, my worst is basically like your worst fear. You know what I'm saying? Your worst fear is like okay, like this is really happening, and so my next thought was, okay, well, what's next? So yeah, I was distraught. I was lost for words. I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do, and I wasn't sure what we was going to do as a city, to be honest with you. Because like I said, this is a small town, so one of my fears was that this story was going to get swept under the rug, and wasn't nobody going to hear about this story. Because as you can see, these guys was able to go for a couple of months, walking around freely and not getting, like, without being arrested. So,
Right. This happened in February, and it wasn't until May that it came to light on a more public, broad sphere. And as you said, Brunswick is about 16, I think around 17,000 people. So it would have been easy to let this be buried.
yes.
So I'm sure that was a fear too, that to be re-traumatized, the community traumatized again, because there's no justice, no prosecution, or at least an act of an investigation.
Exactly. And it thankfully, the city came together. Matter of fact, that same day when that video came out, all I seen was Facebook, like, on my timeline on Facebook, is people going live in front of, like Satilla Shores, which is where the shooting happened. Everybody got together, did a whole protest that same day. The same day the video came out, they all came out and flooded the neighborhood. And it's like, we're not going to stand for this. And sooner or later, I started to see people, celebrities, started to retweet and started to repost the story. So it thankfully, it was the people, like, in the city, like, of just being outraged and having, like, being fed up with everything, with this. They end up tagging people. They end up tagging everybody they can. I was tagging people, just as much as I can, and thankfully we was able to get this story out there.
So now, to talk about your art, it's extraordinarily beautiful. We can see it there in the shop behind you. Sometimes these incidents like this, a crisis or a traumatic situation happens, and creatives in particular, but not just only creatives, but often folks get motivated to sort of do something with their artwork or their music. Talk to me about how Ahmaud Arbery's killing inspired you to paint some things that maybe you hadn't painted before.
Yeah, well, to those who may not know, I also go by art and hip hop. My art is influenced by the culture of hip hop and by the stories of those that I grew up with, and just from Black culture. So Black art and just painting our story and our struggles have always been my thing. So hearing this story, just being one who was always driven by, stories like Trayvon Martin and stories like Mike Brown. When I heard this story had happened, like this had happened in my city, where I practically grew up in, and where I call a city that I call home, it was almost like inevitable that I was going to do something. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew, like, I had to put this in my art. I had to, because I've been speaking, like, for so long. I've been speaking about trauma. Like, my last art show that I did in Brunswick was about trauma, was about Blacks overcoming trauma and the things that have happened to us. So it almost felt unreal that later, 6 months after just at my show talking about, like, trauma and overcoming, tragedy and stuff like that in the Black community, that this tragedy happened.
Right. And I know that we'll get a shot of it a little bit later, but I know you have this beautiful painting of a mother crying. In the background are some red and blue emergency lights. Tell us what that's about.
Well, originally when I went out to the protest, and I seen I'll tell you the story about how that picture came together. So I ain't gonna lie, I'm mad depressed during this time. Like, I'm like, oh my God, like, I don't know. Like there was a period of time where I didn't even know, like, I wanted to do something. I wanted to paint. Like, I was just depressed. I couldn't paint anything. You know what I'm saying? Just because, like, my mind state, I wasn't in the right place. So I'm riding through the protest, and I had missed the protest, but I saw everybody was leaving. And as I'm leaving, like, I passed through, and I see Ahmad's mom, and she's being consoled by, I don't know who it was, like a family member or something like that. And I like, that's the first thing that came to my mind, was like, you know what? We always, like, everybody's going home to their siblings, their sons, their fathers, but Miss Wanda, she's not going back home to her son.
You are a little bit younger than Ahmad. What is your but it's basically in the same age group. What does your mom say to you when you leave the house?
It's crazy, because my mother is very overprotective, like, very extremely protective. So, just seeing this story, like she watches the news. Like, if there's anybody that, like, that's more woke and more conscious to what's going on, it's my mother. So, obviously she sees all this stuff, and she's like, yo, you got to be careful. Like, I don't even know if I want you to, like, be going on the island. Like, so it's she doesn't like me going out, just going out at night. You know what I'm saying? She doesn't like me doing really any of that stuff, because, she doesn't want to become one of those mothers that have to read about her baby boy, or her son, in the headlines, being taken by a neighborhood watchman or some police, so it's a little paranoia there, to be honest with you. There's a little paranoia there, not just even with my mom, like, even with my dad. That's another thing. Like, we try our best to love each other and pray for each other, because it's uncertain. It's uncertainty right now. You don't know rather you leave the house, you're going to come back. I'm pretty sure Ahmad, when he left his house, he had full intentions on coming back. I'm pretty sure his mother, when last time she saw him, she had full intentions that she was going to see her son again. So yeah, it's paranoia there.
Right. I can certainly understand that. And I think I'd be the same if I were a parent.
Yeah.
Roderrick, as we wrap up here, I just want to give you the opportunity to say what you think needs to be said, even if it's already been said before. Right now, anyway, the Black community has the platform. We've got the mic. What would you like to say to white America during this moment in time?
Right now, we are in a very emotional time. Emotions are running high right now. I want to say this to both. Well, first to white America, and then to Black America. To white America, I would say that we need your help. If there's anything you can do, even if it's just by lending your voice, monetary, like anything, you can be a help. Don't feel like you have no power, or this isn't your say just because you're white. You're just as just as much as part of this as we are. Because at the end of the day, I don't look at it as a black or white issue. I look at as a human issue, what we're going through right now. So any way you can, you have to use the privilege that you have as being a white man to try to combat, injustice and that may be going on around you. So if you see something, speak up about it. Don't be afraid to speak up about it. Don't be afraid to take action about it, especially if it's being happening. If it, there's a wrong being going on. You gotta start looking at this as if it was your son, or if it was your daughter or whatever. You have to do everything you can to combat it. And one thing I would say to Black America, and especially black youth, is don't feel like your voice doesn't matter. Your voice matters just as much as everybody else's voice matters. I know, like, being young, sometimes you may feel unequipped. I'm still learning. I'm still learning a lot, but in my process of still learning, I'm not afraid to speak out and speak what's on my mind and speak what's on my heart. I don't feel just because I'm young, like I can't make change, or I can't influence change. It's just like Tupac said, I might not be the one to change the world, but I might be the one that plant a seed in the mind of somebody else who will.
Right. Great. Roderrick Davis, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate your insight and your wisdom and your beautiful art. I can't wait to see more of it as you continue to develop. You stay safe out there.
You too. Thank you for having me.
As Roderrick says, don't feel like your voice doesn't matter, because your voice absolutely matters. Post-traumatic slave syndrome. It's a thing. Our next guest is Dr. Joy DeGruy, who'll explain what this really is. Our guest is Dr. Joy DeGruy. She has a master's in social work, clinical psychology, and a PhD in research. She's also the author of Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. Dr. DeGruy, thank you so much for joining us. So great to have you.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
So let me just start with, when I heard the title of this book, I thought, okay, this really speaks to what I think I've felt and believed and tried to explain to people for many years, and that when I hear, particularly white folks, but also Black people will say, well, why can't Black people just know who they are and get it together? Well, if for generations your family has been torn from the motherland, your language has been destroyed, your culture has been destroyed, even to the point where your color of your skin and the texture of your hair is a bad thing, and all your rituals and practices have been taken away, well, no wonder. And so that, what your book, I think, takes it even a step further, that this pain and trauma from 300, 400 years ago is still prevalent in our DNA. Am I kind of close on that thought?
Yeah, kind of close. And it's kind of, I think the biggest problem with looking at historical trauma is the fact that we look at it as historical. The problem is, not only did we experience hundreds of years of severe trauma, rape, beating, experimentation, mutilation, being bred, all of those things we experienced. But there's kind of a mythology that when slavery ended, the playing field got leveled. And what happened after slavery ended was more trauma. It was different and it was oppressive. It went through Jim Crow. It went through, if you've ever been, and it's not a pleasant experience, but an important one, the Lynching Memorial, or the memorial of that has been erected in Montgomery, that is really honoring the lives of 4,400 people. Those are the names that they had of people that were lynched. When it didn't stop, is my point. It didn't stop the injury. And my issue is, we never have had a collective moment in history to heal, to even acknowledge the injuries. So it's beyond the epidermis. And now with new information around epigenetics, we know that trauma is associated with markers on the DNA. So yeah, it's here. And more importantly, we have been able to thrive and to be more than resilient, to do all of those things in spite of that. But the injury still lingers. And that's something that we have to look at. In my work's about healing.
Talk about what that looks like, what that injury, does that show up?
It shows up in some of the ways that you've already mentioned. The fact that we are still denigrating how we look, the color of our skin. And what bothered me about this is, I have grandchildren, and my grandchildren were talking about an online platform, the light skin, dark skin club. And all of that stuff is still there because we've never intentionally leaned in, done the deep dive, and basically took the poison from the cookies. In other words, taken from the parts of our culture that are rich and build resilience and self-awareness, but to tear away from that some of those adaptive behaviors that we've carried along with us through the years. Something is like children should be seen and not heard. Who is seen and not heard? Someone enslaved is certainly seen and not heard. Children have to be able to engage. People who've been told, he was really, really good looking, even though, he was dark skinned. Those are comments that are made in contemporary society, even in some of the rap songs. So we're looking at teasing that poison out of the culture, the rich, strong culture that we have, teasing out some of those behaviors that are being perpetuated because people don't know or understand how and why they're there. So I believe that when people know better, they can do better.
Right. And you raise an interesting point about understanding why certain practices or certain things are still done today. And one of your lectures I watched was really interesting when you compared a white mom and a black mom. And the black mom says to the white mom, oh, your little Joey's doing really well. And the mom continues to go on bragging, and the family is so blah, 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 blah. But when the white mom says to the black mother, hey, your little, Jackie or Jamal or whatever is doing great too, she's, oh, but he's a handful. Well, he gets on my last nerve. And then my immediate thing is, well, why can't you celebrate your son? But there's a reason for that. Can you explain to us what that is?
So one of the things that I did in my research, because my area of expertise as a clinician is violence and trauma. I mean, that's not necessarily what I wanted to look at, but it's what I did for a number of years. And in that research, I read a lot of historical accounts, meaning I read a lot of slave narratives. I read a lot. I talked a lot with elders. And when I was reading about this, I was, trying to get a grip on it. I started reading some things from slave narratives that one of the things that would happen if we moved that scene that you just talked about of the two mothers, let's move it back a couple hundred years. So now you have a Black mother who's likely enslaved, and so also are her children. And then you have the white mother who is likely the slave owner, but most certainly not enslaved. And let's say that Black mother that you were speaking about is, I don't know, working in the fields, and not uncommon for small Black children to be playing nearby. And let's say the white slave owner, male or female, come through and see this Black mother and notice her child. And they then says to that Black mother, wow, that's your son. That's your boy there, huh? Wow, he's sure coming along. He sure is coming along. Now, what is that Black mother going to say? She's going to say, no, he's not. He's stupid. He can't work because I don't want you to sell him. So I denigrate him to protect him. And that is an appropriate way of adapting when one is in a hostile environment. And the issue is because people have constantly told Black folks, get over it. Well, we need to examine what you're telling me to get over, because there's poison in the cookies. And so we never examined those behaviors, and inadvertently we passed it along through generations, normalizing that behavior and then calling it cultural. So again, there's so many of those folded in our behavior. Everything, I always say, from what we eat to what we believe it means to be a friend or a mother or a father, are all tinged by this history, past and present. And so we have to be deliberate and intentional about what we are saying and what we are teaching children. Not only children, but what we are calling upon in terms of people being accountable as adults. So when I hear people saying things that, you know, where they're really, really denigrating their children, I don't break into a professor's perspective of post-traumatic, but I start to talk a little bit about that and say, yeah, you know what? I know you're proud and it's really okay to be, you know, he's a wonderful, and yeah, of course, all kids have issues, but I find a way to bring the conversation to a positive place. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And without sort of punishing the parent, but also educating, informing the parent about why you're doing this, because they're probably just emulating what was done to them and how they were raised.
Exactly.
You know, it's so interesting, the issue of, you talked earlier about light skin, dark skin, and just color in general. And you had mentioned, and again, I've just been studying them, just love your work. I'm a groupie, sorry. You're talking about a movie that you really enjoyed, and we just saw it last week, King Kong. And for the sheer special effects alone, just amazing. That's why my husband, a movie buff, wanted me to watch it, because I'm a journalist, filmmaker, da da da. And when I saw all those people, I was feeling a certain kind of way. Do I like the fact that they have white people dressed up as black people and black people as black people? They were all savage. Like, that alone was something I'm still trying to process. But I really think it's important for you, if you would share your conversation with a young white boy, his father, about the black people in the movie, and the scariest part there.
So what happened was, a real friend of mine, Dennis Stafford, we went, and I'm almost certain we were in Ohio. I can't remember, but we were going to the first day of the opening of King Kong, and I was going to see it exactly why you were, for the cinematography. I knew they were going to, you know, they had the Jurassic parts and all this. So anyway, I go into the theater. I had no idea that the movie was like 3 hours, right? So I had to go to the bathroom. So I'm trying to figure out, you know, when am I going to dash off to the bathroom? So there was a Jurassic bug scene, right? And I don't like little bugs. I certainly don't like big ones. So I ran out. As I'm running out, there's a young white man, you know, maybe in his 40s or so, and he has a son, and they're both running out. And I'm going, boy, that was a horrible thing. He goes, yeah, that scene must be the worst part of the whole movie so far. So he runs into the bathroom, and the son stops and goes, I didn't like those black people. You know, it was like, I was like, whoa. And then he runs into the bathroom. And then I'm like, why me? You know, because why does it happen to me? I'm just going to the movie. You know what I mean? So I get back in the theater, and Dennis looks at me, he goes, what happened? So I explain to him, and he goes, only you, Joy. This only happens to you. And he says, so, well, you know, you got to just let it go. I said, but the problem I had was the fact that this little white boy could not discern the fact that these weren't black people. Again, there was no way in the world they were going to show all black people in savage cannibal people. They're not going to do that. So they zoomed in, and you saw there were Asians. One of the main characters had blue eyes, just to let you know that they were, I don't know why they were all painted kind of black. But again, anybody who's an adult knows and can see that those are a variety of people, because that certainly wouldn't have gone over well. Mm-hmm. But the little boy couldn't. And so Dennis is saying, get over it, because, you know, it's like 3 theaters worth of, you're not going to be able to resolve this. So when we come out of the theater and all the droves of people are coming out, who do I see leaning on the rail is this man and his son. And so Dennis looks at me and he goes, no way. I said, yeah, way. So I walk over to the man, and he's actually leaning there waiting for his daughter, because she's now in the bathroom. So they're waiting for her to come out. And when we came out, I said to him, I walked over to him, I said, do you remember me? He said, yeah, you ran out during the bug scene. I said, yes. I said, do you mind if I asked your son a question? He says, no, not at all. So I say to his son, now that you've seen the whole film, because, you know, King Kong bites it in the end. I mean, you know, that's pretty bad. You know, I'm right. Like, now that you've seen the whole film, what do you think the worst part of the film was for you now? And he goes, those black people. So his father looks at me like, well, And I said, no. I said, don't worry. I know your son is not a Nazi. That's not what this is about. I said, my concern was that he could not differentiate. And now he has the monster are these people. And I said, and I said, that concerns me that, and then he looks at me, this man looks at me, he says, I don't know. This is a problem that I don't know that we can ever make right. That's what he says. I don't know. But now we're having another conversation. Now we're talking about a bigger issue. And he says,
Right.
I don't know if we can ever make this problem right. And I said, I have to hope that we can. And so his daughter runs out and they begin to walk towards the escalator. And he stops and he turns around, he comes back to me and he says, but I will make it right with them. I will make it right. And it was just a moment. It was a moment. It's chilling. Even now when I say it, I can remember that was an exchange of heart. That was an exchange that said, I recognize my lane here in what I have to do, and I'm going to make that right. And I think that's what we all have to do. We all have to. This is not anything that any individual or group. This is a collective healing that must happen. And I am encouraged by the fact that the world has joined us in this hope. As much as we fumble through it, and as much as we struggle, and we have different views within cultures out there, we don't all have to agree, but we have to agree on one fundamental truth, and that is that everyone is noble and everyone has the right to be treated with respect and dignity. We don't have to earn that. That is something we were born deserving.
Absolutely. Let me just fast forward to 2020, or even really the past, I don't know, Rodney King, do we start there? But let's talk about that little boy who was so frightened by the Black people in the movie, becomes a police officer. And now he's on the streets to serve and protect the community. And some members of the community look different than him. How does that kind of mentality as a young child, being sort of programmed to be afraid of the Blackness, carry on into our adult life, and how that impacts Black people?
What a wonderful question that is. That's something that we've been grappling with, my folks in my organization, my company, and everywhere I go. For years, I worked directly with police officers. I trained police officers in terms of looking at exactly what we're talking about. What we understand is there is bias, right? But what we don't understand is the etiology of that. So if we look at this little boy is entering an academy, the police academy, and he's entering an institution that at its root, fundamentally at its root, is white supremacy. That's what people don't understand. People keep going, how can we fix it? How can we get it back? Every system is perfectly designed to get the results it does, to actually create. It's designed that way. The problem is that we don't understand how policing started. So policing in America, in this country, the foundation of it were slave patrols. That's where policing came from. And the slave patrols were terrorist organizations. They terrorized Black people because of a pathological fear that white people had that we would do to them what they did to us. And so as a result, we've been terrorized ever since that time. Now, here's the good news, because there's some good news to this. The fact that, he is entering this academy, and the police academy isn't the only one. Every major institution in America has been governed by white supremacy. And I'm not saying that metaphorically. That's a reality. So if we try to unpack this and say, what can we do? They actually have been able to impact bias, a variety of things. And matter of fact, I have a theory that even what we're doing here, virtual, people who are coming together virtually, who would not ordinarily be virtually together, that is actually diminishing bias. I really believe that. Somebody's going to test it. Anybody hear me? Test it. So what we do know is that you literally can reduce bias. They've done it 40% by creating scenarios. So they actually had police officers look at scenarios and where the white person is the villain and they're saved by a black person. They personally are saved by the black person. And by the end of this, I don't know, maybe hour long, they actually can reduce bias by 40%. Virtual reality can do it even more. So what now let's unpack what that is. What that means is for this little boy that grew up, that has now been indoctrinated in this system that is poison at its roots. He has to really pull himself out of that in order to be effective in his job. If we really pull this out and really look at it, what are we really talking about? We're talking about people engaging with people. Because you see, we destroy the myth when we come together, when you engage with me, when you know me as a whole person, when you break bread with me, when you know my family, then all of a sudden those myths about how dangerous and scary and violent and angry, those go away in the face of truth. And so long as we can keep people divided, as long as we can keep people separated, we can continue the lie and create the hysteria and all the fear.
That's right.
So you see what I'm saying? So what happens is to this little boy, I'm sorry, all of us are, because in a recent study, they did a recent study of teachers, something like 136, 35 teachers, preschool. These are preschool teachers. And they wanted to, and this is the Yale Child Study. This was done in 2016. They wanted to determine what teachers did when they believed there was a problem behavior. So they let them see these videos and they told them, please identify any potential problem behavior. Well, there was no problem behavior in any of the scenarios. But what they did was they used eye scan technology to see where they looked when they expected a problem. And they looked more at children of color and specifically more at Black boys.
Wow.
So the trajectory of their gaze. And so what we have to appreciate about these 130 teachers or however many there were, was they weren't all white teachers. Okay.
Right.
We're all programmed and trained and socialized to look at that little Black boy. They even looked at teachers where they had two children off task, a Black child and a white child, doing the same off task behavior, and the teacher only sees the Black child.
Wow.
So
that's fascinating and scary at the same time.
Yes, deep. These are the things we have to begin to look at and deal with.
So I would love to keep you for hours and hours, but we just don't have that kind of time. So in the meantime, let me ask you what we want people to be able to watch this, and we don't just want to preach to the choir, so to speak, because we all know what we all say. So we're hoping people who don't look like us watch this show and learn some things, and we want to provide resources and maybe literature for people to get acquainted and have maybe some intellectual and intelligent, thoughtful, sensitive, discerning conversations. And so to help people get to that point, can you recommend a couple of maybe reading items that folks should? 12 million books.
Well, what I would do is which would make it a little easier. If you go to my website, joydegrue.com, I have a suggested reading list. And it's broad, but I mean, you look at it. Also, it's suggested film to look at. A more recent film, and I'm going to send this if you have not seen the trailer for it, is called Invisible Portraits, which is a wonderful, wonderful. It's on Vimeo right now. We just did it, just filmed it. I'm part of it, and I'm not saying it because I'm part of it. It is just really, it's about Black women, and it's about us really claiming our voices, and it's a wonderful film. But it's among the films on my suggested film list. The other thing that I would say too is that, for people to find their own lane, do what you need to do and what you can do from your space. Every Wednesday, I have something called Wellness Wednesday, which streams on Facebook. Also, Joy DeGruy Publications, that's where you can find it streaming. And you can actually go look at all the different titles. And we've dealt with everything. We've brought Black children on, we've brought Black men, we've brought other people of color. I've brought on attorneys. We talked about Karen needs to go to jail. That was one of the titles. And well, we have now the Karen Act. which is wonderful because people are going to be held accountable for lying and putting
Right.
people's lives in danger. Anyway, so if you can always just look, and I did that. Like we created Wellness Wednesdays as a result of COVID because we wanted to reach in and talk to people and reach people that aren't going to go to, you know, the school or the university, that aren't going to go to even my talk if I'm doing a talk or don't have access. I wanted to be able to stream live real life conversations with real life people who are dealing with all of the things that all of us are dealing with, hence the reason why we're doing it this way. So again, you can go on. That's one of the things that I'm doing to try to give to the community, the broader community, not just even in the United States, from all over the world. I also have an online course that I teach. There's two. One is an advanced course and one is an introductory course. Both of them, one's 10 weeks, the other's 5. We're in the 5-week one now. But all of these things, and to educate yourself by engaging with people, you know, and also to reach out to your friends and family, really important for mental health. There's a lot of depression, sadness, anxiety going on, and we need to touch people in the best way that we can.
That's right. Absolutely. And not just because we're social distancing doesn't mean we have to distance ourselves from caring for one another.
Right.
So, Dr. Joy DeGruy, thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure, and really enjoy your work. And I hope you stay safe and healthy out there. And I hope you join us again.
And same to you. Thank you so much.
Dr. DeGruy, thank you for your insights. And it sounds like we should all check out the film Invisible Portraits. And right, community, find your lane and do what you need to do in your community. The divisive national debate on race and policing is at a boiling point. But as I said, it's been smoldering all across the country for centuries. Now is the time to get off the sidelines and do something about it. I hope something you heard here inspired you into action. Join the conversation on Facebook, YouTube, pbs12.org, and on my website, TamaraBanks.com. We'll see you next time.
From Moment to Movement with Tamara Banks has been made possible through the generous support of the Anchor Point Foundation, helping nonprofit organizations and leaders creatively solve problems in their communities around the world.